Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm Bill Omar, SVP of Client Relations at Valuelink, and I'm really glad to have you here with us today. We know that a lot is changing with UAD 3.6, not just for appraisers, but also for lenders and AMCs like yourselves. At Valuelink, we've been working closely with our customer partners to help navigate through the changes. And we wanted to bring you more information about the upcoming changes that are going to take place. That's why we've teamed up with Josh Walitt, someone whom many of you already know and trust, to lead today's session on what's changing and what that means for your appraisal review and delivery workflows. We will leave some time for Q&A at the end of the session, and Josh and our team will try to answer all of your questions. Before I hand it off to Josh, I wanted to mention that if you will be at the Valuation Expo next month, we'd love to connect in person. Just scan the QR code on your screen to book time with our team at booth number 52. Thanks again for joining us. Now over to Josh to get things started.
Great. Thank you very much, Bill. Appreciate the introduction. Appreciate everyone who's here watching. Yeah, I do see some familiar names, so it's great to see you're tuning in. And let's go ahead and get started. All right. So we're going to take a look at really a lender, AMC, we might say appraisal department perspective for UAD 3.6, the new URAR. So we're going to take a bit of an overview today, take a look at some areas of the new report format that might be of most interest to you. And we will also take a little bit of a peek at some of the reference materials that I encourage everyone to get a hold of and to take a look at. So if you don't know me, just a little bit about me there on the screen. I'm with Walitt Solutions, and we are basically a different puzzle piece for different clients in the valuation and compliance space. So we do work for AMCs, for lenders, for platform providers, attorneys, even work for appraisers and appraiser regulators at the state level. So I won't go ahead and read through all that information, but please check me out on LinkedIn. I know we've all been posting a lot of different things about this. Would love to connect with you if you have questions, and I know the same holds true for ValueLink. I've worked with folks at ValueLink for many years, different companies I've worked with, and always found folks very knowledgeable and very free with their information and their assistance. So great folks to partner with. Uh, I'm here representing no coalition, organization, association, anything like that. I'm here representing myself. Nothing here is legal advice. So just a quick reminder. And really, the overriding question is, and I'm sure we all know the answer to this, is this new report format really all that different to those current typewriter forms that we're using now? We are trying to mash in a lot of data on forms that were pretty much designed 30 years ago for typewriters, and the answer, of course, as we all would know or guess, yes, it's extremely different. So we are trying to accomplish the same thing, which is have an understandable appraisal report, but an entirely different format with a completely different data set. So let's take a look here at some of the impacts that we have been discussing with our clients, and I'm sure ValueLink has been assisting many of their clients in terms of integrations and understanding from the technology standpoint and the practical standpoint. How am I going to order these? What is it going to look like, right, in terms of the systems and things like this? So these are some of the discussions. We're taking a look at quality control. As I was literally hours ago, I was teaching a bias and fair housing 3-hour seminar for an AMC client. They need to meet certain lender client requirements. And so we were literally talking about how this new report format has many different advantages. And we just sort of got off the topic a little bit to the new reporting form in the context of what will we see, where will we see it, how can things be communicated, how will maybe this format maybe reduce some erroneous or problematic communications and so on. So really this discussion has a way of sort of sneaking into a lot of different areas that you need to consider. So quality control, the revisions, we certainly don't want revisions being requested when there's no revision needed, right? We just didn't know where to look. Although I will tell you, the new report format, of course, is going to help, I believe, reduce revisions because people can find things a little bit easier. Reconsiderations of value, same type of idea. A lot of training. So I know myself, I've done a lot of training. Here I am doing a type of training seminar here, and we have done it for our lender clients, our AMC clients, and really getting folks ready. I know our perspective is over the entire ecosystem, and we look at the appraisal, AMC, and lender spaces as being part of this ecosystem. And if one piece fails, everything fails. So that's really why we try to engage our clients in a lot of these types of conversations and provide support. And really, in the end, what we're talking about is the readability, the consistency, the transparency in appraisal reports. So you're going to see some of these. I want to plant these seeds in your head as we look at the material today. So it's really sort of in that context that we want to consider everything we're looking at. Of course, we're looking at just the tip of the iceberg today together, right? So we are talking about aspects of that new report format. To be clear, we are not looking at any specific appraisal software. We're not discussing, well, how do appraisers determine adjustments and other technical methods and techniques. And we're also not taking a look at policy, specific policy related to what an appraiser is required to conduct or not conduct, or perform or not perform. Those would be specific to examining FHA HUD handbook, the selling guide, and so on. So we're not zeroing in on that. We're really, again, taking a look at the new report format. Okay. So the timeline you may be familiar with, September coming up fast. Very limited production, very few AMCs, very few lenders. As a result, very few appraisers will be seeing this. January of 2026, that's when we're going to see that broad adoption where any AMC, any lender can participate. We have the mandate in November of next year for beginning only for new loans, UAD 3.6, and then in May of 2027, we have the 2.6 pipeline has to stop, has to be cleared at that point. The GSEs at that point will accept no more 2.6, anything related to it. VA, HUD, and USDA, as far as I know, at this point, have not issued their timelines, but they're adopting it later, I believe, is sort of the conventional wisdom here. All right, so what is the big deal? The big deal is we are taking all of the old forms, the 1004, the 2055, the 1073, the 1075, all the forms that the GSEs currently use for 1 to 4 units, and throwing them out the window. There is one report going forward for single units, for condos, for co-ops, for condops, for manufactured, for 2 to 4 family. It covers the interior, exterior, hybrid, and desktop scopes. So we've got moving parts in these new reports. So we have no more form numbers. So think of, how are we going to order? We're going to order by property type. We're going to be ordering by scope that's expected, right? So there's going to be a different way in the systems to pinpoint how we're ordering it and how it's being communicated and then integrated into various systems. All right, the sections and fields are contingent on the property characteristics and the assignment type, as well as certain fields are optional and in control of the appraiser if they believe it's relevant to the analysis. And that is most specifically noticed in the sales comparison grid, where the appraiser can add and remove certain rows that are optional if it's necessary to sort of understand the comparison being made. So as we look through today, some of this material, we're going to see, hopefully you'll see the outcome will be less searching for content. I think we've all been in the position of saying, where in the world is fill in the blank? I can't find it. What word did they use? Let me try searching by word, right? And everything has a place in the new report. All right, there's no text addenda. There's commentary in every section, and the commentary expands as needed. We have a very common column and grid layout that you'll see. There's a lot more standardized responses, and actually this is the topic that got us on from bias and non-discrimination in the earlier webinar today into the new report format, where there's an emphasis on less custom writing, and someone's going to say that one thing this way and that this way, and where do you put it, and we have more standardization to understand a lot of the characteristics in a more consistent way. There is space for commentary, though, so don't read into that too much. There's still space for commentary, and there's clusters of related content, like content, put together, and you'll see what I mean by that. So text and charts and graphs and pictures and so on. And the approaches to value, we'll see some slides, and we will look at a real report. I think you will agree with me, it actually allows for correct presentation of appraisal methods, right? One quick example for what I mean in the approaches to value is the cost approach. Depreciation for different buildings is usually at a different rate. Well, you can't really demonstrate that very well in the current form, but in the new report, it will be able to be displayed and presented just as the appraiser analyzed it. And so it will be a lot more clear to folks. All right. Not all sections appear in all reports. All right. Only when applicable. I'll give you an example. There's a new green section, new green energy section. Well, if there's nothing to report, it doesn't appear. It doesn't just appear blank. It just isn't there if there's nothing for the appraiser to talk about. All right. And the technology specs that have come from the GSEs to the software providers builds the sections as needed. So for example, if there were a 3-unit, these are the headings that we will see at various places in the report. We will have the interior of building 1 for unit 1. We would see the interior of building 1 for unit 2. Evidently, they're in the same building. They're both in building 1. And then if the 3rd unit is in a different building, we would see it reading as unit interior for building 2, unit 3. So it will build it as needed based on the input from the appraiser. So there's a lot of automation in terms of building a report. So saying to someone, oh, the cost approach is on page blank, isn't going to work, because it'll be on a different page on every assignment, right? Depending on the length of different sections and what expands and collapses. So we'll have a consistent order, just not necessarily everything always on the same page number. I want to show you this. This is actually out of Appendix F. So Appendix F, I like to tell people this is your friend. You're going to get to know Appendix F really, really well. We both, ValueLink as well as Walitt Solutions, we're making all these available, all these resources available on our websites, kind of an organized layout. And all the reference materials, including the samples as well, are on Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac's website. So these are not materials we came up with that we're looking at right now. It's the GSE material. So here we have different types of sections. Some always display, some will display contingent on certain factors, and others will repeat. For example, if we have, we'll see on the next slide, if we have multiple outbuildings, it will appear as many times as needed. If there's an accessory dwelling unit or there's a second accessory dwelling unit, it will repeat. Now, again, we're not talking about Fannie Mae policy, right? Do they allow more than one for that particular, secondary market scenario? But we're just talking about the ability of this reporting format to create more than one ADU section, right? We have some new sections, disaster mitigation. So, for example, if they have typhoon shutters, That would be some disaster mitigation features. We have, as I mentioned, the green features and energy efficiency space. We have an outbuilding. How many of us have searched and searched and searched, looking at reports, trying to figure out, well, where do they describe the outbuilding? I see it on the sketch, but I don't know anything about it. Oh, well, this person types it on the text addenda over here. This person puts it here. This person put it will be in its own assigned section if there's an outbuilding. So very organized in that fashion. We have an official space section, excuse me, for highest and best use. We have a new market section. We'll take a look at that. I've had a lot of questions about, is there a 10, what's happening with the 1004 MC? They got rid of it. I hear they're bringing it back. We'll take a look at what that is going to look like, all right? And project information section. And then we also have a new revision history section. So how many of you have ever been in the position to maybe write a short paragraph about making the revision, or maybe you are asking that the appraiser write that short paragraph about the revision to tell us what you changed, where did, you know, what section was it in, and so on. There is an official section for when a revision occurs to fill out some very basic straightforward, simple information. So again, that's Appendix F, and we'll actually have a chance to take a look at that. So here's the market section. Before we actually go to a report, because what I want to do is I want to go to a report when we finish looking at most of our slides here, and really give you a good feel for this. I know some folks, again, I was doing a webinar with an AMC earlier, and some of them in that meeting had looked at the new reports, some had not. So we know there's there's kind of a mixed bag out there, all right? But I want you to get a really good feel for what that report's looking like, and maybe some new pieces, maybe some really important pieces for you to know as a reviewer or as someone else in the appraisal space and appraisal department. All right, one of the common items that has been discussed over many years and by reviewers and by many appraisers, I know I've always copied and pasted my MLS search criteria into my report. Well, and I know many other appraisers do similar. Here is a space for search criteria description for their market analysis. This would be for what is the primary analysis you conducted. We all know that sometimes there's various different studies that an appraiser needs to do, but this is the main one. There's a look back period. Could be 12 months. They could actually say, actually, I look back 24 months. I know rural. I worked many rural areas, and I'd have to look back 24 months sometimes or more. And so we can have a very good picture of how did they look for properties like this, and what are some of the statistics about about active listings, about the sales, right? Any distressed market competition, what have they attached as a graph? So some very well laid out information. All right, it's almost a combination of the neighborhood section plus the lines at the top of the sales grid where you said the high and low of sales and listings and so on. So it sort of it morphs it all together, all right, and says we're looking for the market here, not neighborhood anymore. Let's look at the market and see what the market says. And here's an example, perhaps on the next page. They attach their price trend graph. Price trend graphs are not required. They are, of course, good practice in many cases. They are not required at this time by the GSEs. All right, let's take a look. Have any of you heard maybe on some online discussion groups of appraisers or other people in the valuation space, and they say, you wouldn't believe how many rows of data there are now in the sales comparison grid? Anyone hear about that? Anyone hear these rumors that it's an incredibly long, the sales comparison is going to be 5 pages long and things? There's a lot of misinformation out there, folks. All right, it is longer. There are some lines that are required and extra compared to today's typewriter form. But in the end, it's really not complex. unless the property is complex. All right, so if it has an ADU, there is going to be information about the ADU on there. Right? If it does have energy efficiency and that's relevant to the, okay, yeah, it's going to be on the grid. So we want to really take a look at Appendix F, and we can see on this page, out of Appendix F, out of these fields that are listed, site size is the only one that's a required field. So sometimes people are looking at the materials, they're looking at maybe some examples that the GSEs have put out there, they're looking at maybe the complex example instead of one of the more run-of-the-mill examples. All right. So in the Appendix F, the blue italics is optional. It's only if the appraiser believes it's relevant for the row, or excuse me, for that row to appear in the sales grid. And hazard zone is, it says always required, but it's only if the subject or comparables are in a hazard zone. So in other words, it's saying if any one of these properties is, then we want to see the status of all of them for comparison purposes. So again, that's not necessarily going to show up in every report. You can see another example here of a page. Here, out of these 4, only heating is required. So again, lots of possible rows, but not an exorbitant amount of required rows. All right, so it's important we understand that. And there are a lot more, as I mentioned earlier, a lot more standardized answers for various items, but you can see there's oftentimes this other option as well. All right, so it can fit the various scenarios. And by the way, if you have questions or comments as we go, feel free to add those to the Q&A or to the chat if we've got that enabled. All right, so let's take a look at a few examples and then we'll go to a real put together mock report. Now this is just showing 2 comparables, all right? So this is showing comparable 4 and 5 just because it just takes a lot of space there in the slide. So we have the subject and then we have comp 4 and 5. Of course, you can see right off the bat we've got photos at the top of the grid. So no more flipping back and saying, wait, which one was? Oh yeah, this was the one. Okay, yeah, and you've got it all right there. All right, everything's spread out in real English words, right? You notice this says settled sale. So currently we have the letter C, right? It says C and then the date. And then that means, oh, it is a settled sale. It's a closed sale. Well, now we actually have the words spelled out, right? We have the actual full dates spelled out, right? We have seller concession. So we have this top general information section moves down to the site. Right. Actually, this came up in a question just a few days ago when I was doing another training session in terms of subdivisions. How do we compare those? Can we do that? Yeah, if we need to, we can put those right in there. All right. You can see range of view. So no more, yeah, you can see the mountains, but it's on your tiptoes on the deck during the winter or fall and so on and so forth, right? So we have more of a standardized way of reporting information. And we would see this also in the site section of the report. We've sort of just skipped into the sales comparison approach, but it's restated there. So we would see that type of view and the extent of view in that site subsection as well in the main part of the report. All right, we are going to year built, not age. We have, again, fully spelled out English words here out of the choices, the standardized choices. A little bit more readable, so people aren't asking what in the world is a 2.1 bath, right? So we can expect, even though the public isn't generally an intended user for mortgage appraisals, we could expect that when it is passed on to them, they might have a better chance of understanding what's in the report, right? We also have here exterior and interior quality ratings. And this is going to be important to reviewers, right? When you're looking at photos, especially related to the subject, but you may have access to other photos with the comps as well, really taking a look at the quality and condition of the exterior and quality and condition of the interior. This has actually been met very well by a lot of appraisers I talk to, because sometimes there is that situation where the outside has been remodeled and resided and all this, but you go in, the quality of materials is lower, the condition is lower, and so on. So being able to fine tune, evaluate it, but not too granularly, is beneficial. For comparison purposes, notice there is no space to adjust in these exterior and interior quality and condition ratings. The adjustments come in the overall quality and condition, just like today. So it's going to be the same method and technique that the appraisers use in evaluating adjustments in that overall holistic sense, rather than granularly on each of these lines, as you see where the laser is there. Okay. Different amenities, of course, so more space and explanation for decks and fireplaces and things like this. Vehicle storage, of course. You can see vehicle storage has here, let's say they had 3 types of vehicle storage. So we might have 3 rows there. There's a driveway, there's a garage, and there's a carport, let's say. There's still going to be one place to adjust it, and this is called the new roll-up adjustment. All right, so we have a row, typical traditional row adjustment here on the quality line, and on the vehicle storage line, we have a roll-up combined adjustment. So you're going to be seeing that. So you need to be aware of sort of, well, what section am I looking at? Okay, this top line, it relates to what follows, right? So if you're picturing, okay, how am I going to be reading these? How am I going to be understanding these, right? Before you jump to conclusions and wonder, well, where's the adjustment for it? Well, just look up, and maybe you'll see it there if it's a roll-up adjustment section. And that's not in the control of the appraiser, that is in the technical specs. So it's not, it's not the appraiser deciding, do I want you to do a roll-up adjustment? It's just for certain sections of the sales comparison approach, it is a roll-up adjustment. And that's just through the specifications. All right. We also have this last line here. First of all, the summary section at the bottom of the grid sort of restates a lot of information. So again, it's not as much as it looks like. Some of this is restated, and we are looking at a fairly simple assignment here, simple property in this example. Comparable weight. Most and most, you can choose least, most, and then no weight. So even though it's grammatically incorrect to say that 2 or 3 or all had the most, that's the way the system is being presented and will be used. So in this particular case, these are given similar weight in the reconciliation. Let's say there are 3 comps, and the appraiser says most, most, most. That means they gave relatively equal weight to each. Now, they're still going to write about it. There's still a commentary section. There's still this discussion for how did they derive these large adjustments, and why did they select this comp, and all that. So that's still there. All right, but we have more standardized responses, also able to take a look at things as we look through. For example, many of you use Value Link's QC tools. All right, so using their QC tools now, when we get through to this broad adoption, there's going to be even more data to analyze, and maybe even more analytics to give back, and understanding when are some things inconsistent. If we have most for all comps, and it's at the very low end of the range as far as the opinion of value, something doesn't jive there, right? If you're saying all 3 of these comps are most, they're all equally weighted, and yet they came in at the very low end of that, it doesn't make sense, right? So we're going to be able to see some of, okay, do we have a real understanding of how this appraiser tried to reconcile these comps into one final opinion of value? All right. And there's also an optional section. Keep in mind, it's an optional section for additional properties analyzed that were not used. The appraiser could put something in there from, the homeowner gave them information, or if you're already ahead of me, you're thinking reconsiderations of value. So if there's a reconsideration of value, they could fill in this section. There is a revision and reconsideration section, but they could come over here and say, here are the 3 sales provided in the reconsideration of value, and these are the reasons I didn't use. And then they could also go on to say, but the 4th sale I've added, or whatever the circumstance is. Okay, that's not a required section. It's not always going to appear. Let's look at another one quickly, just to get an idea. Here's another one. Here's 1, 2, and 3, comps 1, 2, and 3. This is not the same report. All right. So nothing really crazy here. We can see leasehold property rights were appraised. There, the ground rent then pops up. So again, fields and rows appearing only if contingent, or only if required, contingent on maybe other answers or the type of property or the assignment type. All right. But here we have, again, this section, energy efficient and green, did not appear in the last example. That's because there was nothing to report. So the appraiser didn't include that. There was nothing to compare. There was no relevancy there. And this is a roll-up adjustment, you can see here, saying don't granularly try to adjust on either of these lines. Just give it one lump sum adjustment as necessary. You notice here, again, down at the bottom, there's no space for interior and exterior quality and conditions. There's no space to adjust, whereas we do in other areas like square footage and rooms and things like this. All right, let's look at the next. This is a longer example. You can see here we have interior quality and condition. Again, we have no adjustments, do we? No adjustments, no numerical adjustments being made there. And you can see in this example, the appraiser has chosen to include additional lines of detail. Perhaps it was important for the comparison discussion. Maybe down below there were some certain adjustments made for quality or condition in the overall section, as you can see with the laser. So maybe they thought, you know what, detailing it up above is going to help. It's going to help explain this. Right? So there's some flexibility, there's some fluidity to how the appraiser presents their case, so to speak, right? Presents their analysis. All right, and then again, we can see the roll up in the vehicle storage that we took a look at. Here's various rows of data, but we're getting just one adjustment made for that entire concept of vehicle storage. All right, here's some outbuildings. You can see these are sort of, we could think they're roll-up adjustments, but they're just on a white line here because they sort of appear as subsections under outbuildings, but it's still the roll-up concept. They're looking at these multiple 3 lines under the first one and then adjusting it all as negative 16,000. All right, and then comparable weight, again, you get to see another example of that. And I have question here, last section, can you add that after if you get an ROV? Yeah, I do believe that may be more of a software question. But if you were to take a look at this last section, additional properties analyzed, not used, I do not believe, I haven't seen anything, at least in the specs and the materials I've looked at, that it's sort of locked out at a certain point and you have to only handle it somewhere else. But we will see, this is not the revisions and reconsideration section. This is part of the sales comparison section, but I do believe you could still include that, just like you could change out your comps, you could fix adjustments if there was an error or something like that. So great question. Thank you for that. I hope I've addressed it. If not, go ahead and ask it with any other nuances that I didn't cover. Here's cost approach. Cost approach builds out a lot better. Cost approach builds out a lot better. It itemizes really sort of at the outset, starts with the conclusion, breaks it down, then we move into the various sections. So here's the depreciated cost for the dwelling, some information here. we can see it's only talking about the dwelling. It's only talking about that building. All right, now in this example, we can see it's a manufactured home example. All right, now you see this subsection total 154.5 matches with that summary at the top of the cost approach section we just looked at. All right, then we go on to depreciating each outbuilding as appropriate, building them with cost, depreciating them as necessary. All right, which is really, really difficult to do in the current form, right? I think we all know that. And that is a solution that they've come up with here for this format. All right, as is site improvements. And then we go on to the site value. The appraiser is going to choose from a prescribed list, allocation, extraction, sales comparison, or other. In this case, this example shows sales comparison. So a land grid, a vacant land grid appears, and they can fill it in, and it doesn't require three. There's some fluidity there in terms of how many they rely upon, and a short reconciliation area. Well, I should say reconciliation area can be as short or as long as the appraiser needs. Remember, this expands and collapses as needed. So we see that there's 4 lines here in this commentary section. If they needed 10 lines, there would be 10 lines available to them. Okay. And then finally, we have the bottom section where it's basically talking about the source and then any commentary related to the cost approach. Let's take a look here. I do have a question coming up in Q&A. So for now, will VA, FHA, et cetera, appraisals still be on the old forms? And the answer is yes. So we'll listen for announcements from them, from VA, FHA, USDA, to see what is it, or when is it that they're requiring those. All right. We have the rent schedule. So we don't need that 1007 as a standalone anymore. All right. We have some it's just a different layout. This is not revolutionarily different than let's say the current 1007. And we have a disclosure of the rental comps and then laying it out unit by unit. So if the subject has 3 units, there will be 3 presentations of the rental analysis. There will be a presentation for subject unit 1, and then subject unit 2, and then subject unit 3. All right, which is a lot more accurate and understandable way than what we have currently in some of the forms, especially the 2 to 4 unit form. Right, and then finally, the income approach. Really, we know, very bottom of our slide, that's pretty much all we have right now on the forms, isn't it? But this actually gives the ability to spread the sales of rental properties, which is the source of deriving a GRM. So again, remember when I planted that seed early on and I said it allows for the correct presentation of the appraiser's process, right? Instead of trying to jam it into this form that doesn't work and doesn't show the support, doesn't explain anything. And finally, before we move on to looking at the report, we have this reconciliation section. All right, so opinion of market value. In this particular example, it's made subject to 2 different items. And we have some stock language that preprints. If they choose subject to inspection, it fills in this first part of the sentence. If they make it subject to repair, the second part appears. If they choose both portions of the phrase appear. All right, and then there is always this sentence, this might have affected assignment results, which is a USPAP required sentence. All right, some free form for the reconciliation. We have a spot for reasonable exposure time. Other pre-printed items here at the very bottom, as well as here in the middle. And what's interesting about the defects, damages, and deficiencies is if it occurred on the exterior, the photo and the description of it will appear in that section. If it happened on the interior, it will show it that section. And then what it does is it combines them all and restates them here in the reconciliation section. So for example, these appeared in different, could have appeared in different areas. let's say one was dwelling exterior and one was dwelling interior, they would both appear here. Now, in this particular case, it happens to be dwelling exterior. All right, but it's restated. You will also see the current condition. So in other words, we know once it's subject to repair, it's going to be whatever, C3 or whatever they presented in the rest of the report. But for certain purposes at lenders, you need to know, yeah, but how does it sit right now? Maybe for escrow purposes or for, whatever scenario. And now we have a consistent place rather than a revision bat saying, can you ask them what the condition code is right now? And, oh, where did they type it and things? It's just there. It's saying, okay, yeah, it sits as a C4. It very well could be a C4 after the repair as well. But, we don't know the circumstances, right? But the point here is that it very often is a different condition rating, and this gives the opportunity for a consistent place for it to appear. And here is that revision history section that I mentioned to you. If there's no revisions, no reconsiderations, this won't appear. But if it comes up, they're going to go into their software, and however it looks in their user experience, they're going to go in and complete a revision history, and then it will generate to the report. So we can see they're going to identify the section, give a short description of what went on. If it included a reconsideration of value, that subsection will appear, and they can write about it there. And this is that scenario that we talked about. They could also go back to the sales comparison. They could swap out comps if that's what they determine is necessary, or they could also include information about properties that were considered but not included as comps. All right, so let me just pull up an example report, but I want to take a look at a couple of comments I see. One of the things I'm frequently searching for is subject to condition items, often buried somewhere in addenda. Is there a specific location? Okay, so you were literally reading my mind that we were going to cover it. Again, just to give you a little more detail, so let's emphasize that because this is big, right? This is a big issue that AMCs and lenders need to look for. So you will see the deficiencies and defects and damages section in virtually every section of the report, in the exterior, in the interior of Unit 1, in the interior of Unit 2, in the accessory dwelling unit, and so on and so forth, right? And then it will sum it up, combine all those that any were subject to, because you could note a deficiency, but it's not subject to, but it'll appear in the report. But anything subject to is going to be summed up in the reconciliation, and it will also be summed up in the first page of the report, which is a new summary page of the report. So it was a great question, and I'm glad you asked that. We can sort of re-emphasize that a little bit. All right, let's take a look. What do appraisers do when underwriters start saying they want more lines than presented because they're used to seeing them from other appraisers? Well, I think underwriters and other participants are going to need to understand that if something's not relevant, it's not going to be there. And so that's why we're here in these types of settings to where we're saying, if something's blank, it's not going to appear. If something's not relevant, it's not going to appear. I could envision maybe a lender saying, hey, we always need to see X, Y, or Z. But if there's nothing there, it's either technologically not possible for them to trigger that, or it's kind of just a waste of space. And then you're going to end up with the whole revision back and forth issue that we have today. So I think everybody sort of getting on board with what's going on is going to be a lot more useful. But I think we're going to see every report is so, I don't want to say so different, but that they're going to see nuances that are different from report to report, that they're just going to understand that, yeah, it's not going to look identical for every property because many properties are different. The appraiser can also add additional lines at the bottom if there's something very unique that's not handled. But again, to have hopefully lenders aren't sitting there saying, well, oh yeah, we're going to add these layers and you need to add these 3 rows to every report, because I think that's sort of maybe shooting themselves in the foot a little bit. It's taking something that's has an objective of being a lot more efficient and it's making it much less efficient at that point. Okay, all right, let's take a look at this real quick. Oh, I didn't include the first, but we're going to just look at the report because we have a question about the reconciliation. I'm going to jump to the reconciliation to answer this next question. What do you do when the cost approach or the income approach, or I suppose the sales comparison approach could be, but that would be incredibly unusual, is not necessary for credible results? Here's, I didn't include, for slide purposes, I didn't include the entire reconciliation section, but there's that for you. You can see they can give a reason. Now, those of you who are appraisers or who are USPAP instructors, you may recognize that we have guidance that says not necessary for credible results is actually not a reason for exclusion. People could argue over that if they want, but let's use this as an opportunity to look at Appendix F. All right, let's look for reason for exclusion. This is what I'm gonna search for that phrase in Appendix F. All right, I'm gonna go to the top of it actually, just so I start near the beginning. We're gonna search for reason for exclusion and see, did that appraiser type that free form, or were those choices, or was that one of the choices? So let's look at reason for exclusion. All right, here we go. Reason for exclusion. It was difficulty estimating depreciation. This is for cost approach, the reasons, but this is a good example. Lack of land sales, not necessary for credible results. It's actually one of the preformed choices, but they always have the other, and they can describe if there's something, some custom reason there. You can see for the income approach, we also have those choices. Insufficient data, not necessary, or other. All right, so we're getting sort of a perspective of the appraiser, right? Seeing sort of what is the appraiser being faced with. So let's take a look at this report. Keep the questions coming if you have any. I'm checking the Q&A and I'm checking the chat, so I'm just kind of going back and forth there. But we are, at the point in the presentation where I'd love to handle some questions you have. Here's an example from a manufactured house. It's manufactured. See over, let me do this so I'm not highlighting everything. Over here, manufactured, it tells us. All right, this is the new summary page that I mentioned. It's the first page. So instead of everyone flipping to page 3, they're going to flip to the first page, and they're going to see the opinion of market value. What's the condition? Is it as is? Is it subject to? Was it hybrid? Was it desktop? Was it traditional? All right, it's basically, think of it as an executive summary. All right. Just kind of a summing up. Here's your front photo. All right, here we have now the assignment information, some interesting information for reviewers, for QC folks, for AMCs, lenders, taking a look and saying, okay, well, we can see right off the bat, was there a property data report used? No. And that makes sense because they're saying it's a traditional appraisal. There was no property data collector in that. There's a place for appraiser fees, as well as a place for AMC fees if the appraiser needs to or perhaps chooses to put that if they have that information. But we all know that there's certain states that do require either one or both of those fees to be posted. Very clear disclosure of the parties involved. Here, this is an example of having a supervisory appraiser in addition to the appraiser. This one doesn't actually show the AMC. If you look at other examples from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, you'll see there are examples with AMCs. So you will see reports where the appraiser, if they've typed in an AMC, it will appear. If they've left it blank in their software, it doesn't generate to the report. All right, and obviously they would, if you're an AMC, you're of course always going to see your AMC coming through on that. All right, we have very clear disclosure on who observed or inspected the exterior and interior. You can see in this example, the supervisor did not inspect, whereas the other appraiser, looks like a licensed residential appraiser, did. I want to get to some other concepts here. We have a lot of clusters. All right, so the clusters up here. So what we mean by that is we have the text and graph charts and everything, all the information there, followed by all of the exhibits, photos, and so on. So there's no more flipping back and forth. In this particular view that we're looking at with the site is handled fully in the site section. There's not see the, photos, see the, survey, see the plat. There's a GIS for the zoning. There's all these things. No, it's all there depending on the circumstances of the assignment and the property, right? So you can see it handles very well in terms of having more than one parcel. If there are, it asks whether it's contiguous or not. So can you see how what they've done is they've put together all these questions over the years, looking at their own policies, getting feedback from appraisers, feedback from lenders, feedback from AMCs. This is what we go back and forth on. This is what we often have to ask for because they didn't include it. Those types of things are now going to be handled, we would say, in a broad sense, right? Obviously, every detail is probably not handled. We also have these grids throughout. Now, they're not all the same, depending on what it is we're looking at, but you can see a very sort of this grid or this chart type organization of data. So again, for some readability, for consistent the standard responses, right? So here we can see site influences. All right, we have some sort of landfill. It's considered adverse. We have a lake. We have it's beneficial and overhead power lines and so on and so forth. All right, there's special section for water frontage with private access. That's a new subsection they've added. And again, as we saw in the site section of the sales comparison grid, I said, okay, this is pulling from the site section where we now have the new range of view, right? So yeah, we're saying it's lake and it's beneficial. It's a full view of it, all right? Woods, it's a partial view of woods. It's a seasonal view of power lines. So maybe they have trees in the way or something and you can't always see them or something like that. I'm not sure what that circumstance would be. All right. And again, emphasis on more standardized responses. So again, you can kind of see this grid and column layout is used for a lot of different components. All right. This is an example floor plan. The traditional sketch is still fine. This is just an example they've given. Here it's ANSI, so the appraiser does have to state what is the measurement standard. All right. Are there any converted areas to the dwelling? And again, we have this concept of exterior quality and exterior condition, and we will see the same in the interior as well. We will have an interior quality rating and an interior condition rating. Again, at the end, it sort of sums up, okay, tell us what the overall ratings are. And of course, that's what's in your approach to value, in your sales comparison approach, right? Where those are the adjustments being made, where we just have informational lines with no adjustments made for the interior and exterior quality and condition. All right. Is this all clear as mud to you? Let me take a look at some questions here. How do they state when the cost approach is not relevant? I think we did look at that. I don't know the exact timing of when all these chats were added in here. But in that reconciliation section, they can do that. They can have a brief sort of other response, right? And they can also have their reconciliation comments if they need to expand on it. How will these forms work with fix and flip, where there are two sets of comps, ARV and as is, different condition ratings. What I can tell you about that is there is a client condition section. I don't have the example, or I don't have an example because they haven't mocked up an example of that. But I do know it's in the official new URAR class that I have taught multiple times now. There is a slide they made, but obviously that's not for this presentation. There is, again, as I said, they can have multiple value conclusions. So they can say, all right, we are determining the as repaired value, and it, but the report was performed for as is. So we have an as is and as repaired. And then maybe they even want the as is and as repaired in a shorter exposure time for liquidation value or something like that. All right. So there are spaces for that. That's a very good question. There just isn't an example to show you of that. But that would be in the reconciliation section where additional value opinions can be communicated. All right. Let's take a look. Is there an ability to have areas pre-filled that are standard, or will you have to fill out each field every time for each report? That's going to be a software question, right? That may very well vary from software to software in terms of, can I copy and paste? I've had that question quite a bit, actually. Can I copy and paste still? Well, I don't want to sort of venture in to, how should I say? I don't want to say what the software providers are doing without representing a software company, but I can't imagine someone designing software where you couldn't paste something in. Now, whether you can create templates and how that will look, that's going to be different from software vendor to software vendor, as it is today. There's different ways of creating and cloning and making templates and things like that. Let's
Josh,
take a
I
look.
have a quick
Yeah.
question.
Yes, Nikki.
Going back to that fix and flip thing, so would you use
Yeah.
the grids in the same way that you do today? So 1 through 3 is you're gridding your as is, and then 4 through 6 you're gridding your as repaired in this new instance then?
That's going to be a software question in terms of how you might lock condition fields, how you might lock square footage fields, if the fix and flip adds square footage, and so it changes from what the as is scenario to the as repaired value scenario. So that's going to be a software question.
Okay.
Just like today, different appraisers have some different preferences of how they handle it. It's also controlled to a certain degree by the software providers as well, in terms of, well, how can you get the software to do it? Whether or not it's just adding on an additional exhibit and then summing it up in the reconciliation, or whether there's a different answer to it. I have a feeling it's going to just vary from, in terms of how it's handled.
Okay.
So that
Thank
was,
you.
yeah, I wish I had a better answer for you, but it's a great question. We do know that in terms of the conclusions, there is a formalized place to put those. In terms of exactly how the grids will work for a second use scenario, we don't have a picture of that.
Okay.
Or, the concept of that. Let's take a look here. Do you think appraisers will be charging or requesting higher fees? Will the form require more hours for completion? I'm always hesitant to answer in terms of how long something's going to take or how much someone's going to charge. Right now, when we take a look at, I teach a lot across the country, talk to a lot of appraisers, and the time it takes appraisers to do the work and to then write the report, it's a huge spectrum. Part of that's because of how the inspection is done. Sometimes people are doing double work. They're drawing it, they're writing everything down, they're taking the photos, and it's all manual. And then they go back and they, sometimes stick a card into the computer. They load the photos. They draw out the sketch on their software from their clipboard. They then have to type in all the characteristics, and well, that takes a long time, right? There's other people who might have most of their report written, at least in terms of their subject property and maybe even their comps if they've brought data with them in the field. So it's really hard to say how much time it's going to take appraisers. I think it will take longer initially, and then I think it has the potential for taking less time. But again, it's so specific to each practitioner. It's hard to give a perfectly good idea on that. Let's take a look. So when the actual condition is C5 or C6 and it's made subject to repairs, how will the grid reflect the hypothetical condition C4? It's going to, so if we're just talking about a single value assignment, we're not talking about Nikki's as is and as repaired. So I don't know if that's what you're talking about or not, but I'm going to just go with, let's say it's just a normal purchase appraisal. There's no fix and flip. There's one value. They need a market value, one opinion of value. They're going to do it the same way. They're going to spread comps for, oh boy, it's subject to repairs. They have to repair this, 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 and this. Okay, they're going to choose comps that have all that completed, and they're going to present in their sales comparison grid the sales that match the as repaired, as it will be hypothetically repaired. So I don't think, if I'm understanding your question, it'll be handled exactly the same way. The only difference in that single value opinion assignment will be that there's an additional field saying, well, what's the condition right now? But that doesn't change how you perform your sales comparison approach. Okay, so that they're not changing, that your comps will be subject to repair, the subject to repair condition. I'm not sure if Richard, if you have more to that question, let me know, because I'm not real. There's not. I guess the short answer is these report forms or these new reporting formats don't change how appraisers are going to present their comparables in terms of selection of comps, in terms of adjusting them, in terms of if it's made subject to, that's how you prepare your sales comparison approach. Let's take a look here. I've got, you can get copies of this report example and others on Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac's website. Also, Walitt Solutions and ValueLink will be having this and recordings of different sessions and things like that. Let me take a look. Can you repeat where the necessary repairs will be if it's subject to? Yeah, let's see if we have any, if this, actually, let's look up here if, okay, so this we see on the summary page, the first page of this new report format. We have there are no defects, damages, or deficiencies requiring action. There could be something noted in a section that relates to damage, deficiency, and defects, but it doesn't require inspection and doesn't require repairs. So let me see if I can quickly see an example that has it. Here's an example. Here's the summary page. Right? We're in the summary page. And in this particular case, from the dwelling exterior section, right? See where it says dwelling exterior, it pulled that from the dwelling exterior section. It appears in dwelling exterior section, and it recopies it onto the summary page because it requires action. It requires repair. Now, evidently, this is an assignment where the appraiser was required to estimate the cost. That can be turned on or off depending on the needs of the assignment. All right, I'm going to look at a few other things and I'm going to finish answering this question. There's the current condition before the repair is completed. And if we were to go down to the sales comparison approach and look at overall condition, we can see they're saying the subject will be C4. It will be C4 subject to the repair. So that's how we do it now. So back to that question, I was a little confused on what person was asking. We're doing it just as we do it now. If it's subject to repair, what's the condition? that afterwards. The extra field is simply saying, oh, but tell us over here in an isolated part of the report what the condition is right now. Okay, but to finish this question we have the repairs appearing in the section they apply to. They are repopulated over to the summary page, and then they are repopulated to the reconciliation section. Now, you might think, wait a second, it restated it here, but there's 2 lines. This requires no action. So the summary page shows the ones that had required actions because it's the executive summary page. Here, they're showing everything that was noted in any defect, damage, or deficiency section of any of the sections in the report. It restates them here, including the ones needing action and the ones needing no action. Okay? So some of those items literally appear 3 times. They may appear on the summary page. They'll appear wherever they belong in whatever section they apply to, and then they will be restated in the reconciliation section too. Let me take a look. I just want to make sure I'm not missing questions, and feel free to take yourself off mute. It's a small enough group. You can feel free to do that. Let's see if there's more in the chat. Ability to have, okay, pre-filled. Okay, I don't see any other questions or chats being typed here. If I've missed something, ask it quickly in the chat, and I'll watch for it. But otherwise, we're a bit over. I know people have places to be, things to do. I didn't want to leave any questions unanswered, though, so it's always hard. I don't want to have extra time that's just empty space, but 7 minutes over is not the worst estimate of time. I don't see any other questions coming through, so I'm going to turn it back over to Bill, and I will get it onto our slide where you can get more information. So feel free to reach out to me. Feel free to connect with ValueLink.
Yeah. Thank you, thank you, Josh.
Thank you.
Wonderful session, really insightful, and I hope everybody attending gained a lot of information today. For all of the attendees, please feel free to reach out to the ValueLink team or to Josh. We would be happy to answer any follow-up questions. And if you're attending the Valuation Expo, again, please scan the QR code, set up a meeting with us. We'd love to meet you there. Thank you once again. Appreciate everyone's time. Have a great rest of the day. Bye.